The transport ship's view screen flickered to life as Xerion Prime came into view, and Kai Brennan pressed his palm against the cool metal bulkhead, steadying himself against the artificial gravity's subtle shifts. The planet below was a marvel of crystalline spires and geometric perfection, its cities gleaming like cut diamonds against the violet-tinged atmosphere. "Beautiful," he murmured, though his diplomatic training reminded him that beauty often masked complexity and danger. "Ambassador Brennan," came a crisp voice from behind him. "We're receiving clearance to dock. Your liaison will meet you at the port." Kai nodded to Captain Torres and gathered his modest belongings. 3 months of preparation had led to this moment, humanity's first formal diplomatic mission to the Xerion Dominion. After decades of Cold War and border skirmishes, both species had finally agreed to peace talks. The weight of 2 civilizations rested on his shoulders. The docking bay was a cathedral of polished stone and flowing lines, alien architecture that seemed to sing with harmonious frequencies. Kai's boots echoed against the crystalline floor. As he descended the ramp, his breath visible in the cool, thin air, waiting for him stood a figure that made him momentarily forget his diplomatic composure. She was tall, nearly matching his 6-foot frame, with skin that held the faintest luminescent quality, like moonlight on water. Her hair fell in waves, of deep midnight blue, and when she turned to face him, her eyes struck him like a physical blow. They were silver, not metaphorically, but literally silver, reflecting the ambient light with an otherworldly gleam. "Ambassador Brennan." Her voice carried the musical quality typical of her species, but underneath lay something colder than the station's recycled air. "I am Thessa Veltar of the Third Dominion caste. I have been assigned as your cultural liaison during your stay." She didn't extend her hand. A gesture Kai had been briefed was considered crude among her people. Instead, she placed her right hand over her heart and inclined her head in what he recognized as a formal greeting. "The honor is mine, Liaison Veltar." Kai matched her gesture, though his felt clumsy by comparison. "I'm grateful for your guidance in the days ahead." Something flickered across her features, surprise, perhaps, at his careful pronunciation of her name. But the expression vanished so quickly he might have imagined it. "Follow me. The Dominion Council has arranged quarters for you in the diplomatic sector." She turned without waiting for his response, her movements fluid and precise, as they walked through corridors lined with holographic displays showing Xerion's achievements. Kai attempted conversation. "Your world is remarkable. The integration of technology with natural crystal formations is unlike anything in human space. Your species finds our architecture aesthetically pleasing?" The question seemed to puzzle her, as if she'd never considered such a perspective. "Very much so. There's an elegance to it, a harmony between function and beauty." Thessa paused mid-step, those silver eyes studying him with newfound intensity. "Harmony. Yes, that is central to our way. Emotion disrupts harmony, Ambassador. It creates chaos where there should be order. Sometimes a little chaos makes life interesting," Kai said with a gentle smile. Her expression hardened. "That is precisely why these negotiations are necessary. Humans are unpredictable. Your species allows feelings to override logic, passion to cloud judgment. It is a fundamental weakness. Or perhaps it's a strength you haven't learned to appreciate yet. We don't love like you do, Ambassador Brennan." Her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Attachment weakens us. It makes us vulnerable, irrational. The Dominion has achieved peace through emotional discipline for over a millennium." Kai studied her profile as they resumed walking, noting the subtle tension in her jaw, the way her hands clenched and unclenched at her sides. For someone preaching emotional discipline, she seemed remarkably affected by their conversation. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "that's exactly what we need to discuss." 3 weeks into the negotiations, Kai had learned that patience was both his greatest asset and his greatest challenge on Xerion Prime. The Dominion Council met only twice per week, their discussions following ritualized patterns that could stretch a simple trade agreement into hours of ceremonial posturing. Thessa had proven to be an invaluable guide through the maze of alien protocol, though she maintained her professional distance with the determination of someone fighting a war. against herself. Still, Kai had begun to notice the small cracks in her composure. The subsection regarding mineral rights requires unanimous consent from all 7 Dominion houses, she explained as they walked through the council chambers after another lengthy session. House Karthus has concerns about human mining techniques. Because we're too emotional to handle heavy machinery? Kai's tone held gentle humor rather than irritation. Something that might have been a smile flickered across her lips before she caught herself. Your species does have a tendency toward improvisation. We call it creativity. The Dominion calls it dangerous. They emerged onto one of the station's observation decks, where the view of Xerion's primary moon filled the transparent aluminum. Viewport. Kai pulled out a small device, a music player, and soft instrumental music began to flow from its speakers. Thessa froze. What is that? Music. Human music. He adjusted the volume to barely audible. It helps me think after long negotiations. She stood transfixed, her silver eyes wide as the melody washed over them. The piece was one of Earth's classics, a piano, composition that spoke of longing and distant shores. Your people create these sound patterns for pleasure? Her voice held wonder she seemed unable to suppress. For many reasons. Joy, sorrow, celebration, mourning. Music helps us process emotions, share experiences. He watched her face, noting how the tension in her features began to soften. What do your people do when they're overwhelmed? We meditate. We achieve balance through mental discipline. But her words lacked conviction, and her body swayed almost imperceptibly to the rhythm. And does it work? The question hung in the air between them. Thessa's hands trembled slightly before she clasped them behind her back. It has always worked before, she whispered. Before he could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights bathed the observation deck in pulsing red as an automated voice announced, "Hull breach in Sector 7. Emergency containment protocols activated." The civilian quarters? Thessa gasped, her composure cracking completely. There are families with younglings. She was already moving, her diplomatic robes flowing behind her as she ran toward the emergency lift. Kai followed, his longer strides, allowing him to keep pace as they descended into chaos. Sector 7 was a nightmare of twisted metal and sparking electronics. A transport had malfunctioned during docking, tearing through the outer hull and trapping civilians in the collapsed corridor beyond. Xerion security forces were already working to extract the survivors, but their methods prioritized structural integrity over speed. They're moving too slowly, Kai muttered, watching as precious minutes ticked by. Protocol demands, Thessa began. Protocol be damned. Kai was already stripping off his formal jacket, revealing the utilitarian clothing beneath. That support beam is going to collapse in minutes. I can reach the trapped family through that gap. You cannot. The risk calculations. Sometimes you don't calculate risks, Thessa. Sometimes you just act. He was moving before she could protest further, squeezing through twisted metal with the determination of someone who'd spent years in Earth's disaster zones before joining the diplomatic corps. Behind him, he heard Thessa shouting orders to the security team in her own language, her voice sharp with fear. The family, 2 adults and a small child, were huddled beneath a fallen beam. The child, barely more than a toddler, was unconscious, her luminescent skin dim with trauma. Kai worked quickly, using emergency supports to shore up the wreckage while guiding the family to safety. The beam gave way just as he pushed the last adult through the gap, tons of metal crashing down where they'd been trapped. Kai felt the sharp edge of debris slice across his shoulder and back as he threw himself clear, pain flaring through his body like liquid fire. Strong hands pulled him to safety. Thessa's hands, he realized dimly. She was kneeling beside him, her perfect composure shattered as she examined his wounds with trembling fingers. Foolish, reckless human, she whispered. But her touch was infinitely gentle as she applied pressure to stem the bleeding. You could have been killed, but I wasn't. Kai managed a weak smile through the pain. And neither were they. Why? The word broke from her like a sob. Why would you risk yourself for strangers? Because it was the right thing to do. Because they needed help. He reached up, his fingers barely brushing her cheek. Because sometimes love isn't just about those closest to us. It's about caring for everyone. Thessa stared down at him, silver tears tracking down her luminescent skin. Her emotional walls were crumbling. And for the first time since he'd arrived on Xerion Prime, Kai saw not the perfect diplomatic liaison, but a woman struggling with feelings she'd been taught to deny. I don't understand what you're doing to me, she whispered. I'm not doing anything, Thessa. You're just learning what it means to be alive. As medical teams arrived to treat his wounds, Kai saw something shift in Thessa's silver eyes. The ice was beginning to crack, and beneath it something warm and dangerous was starting to bloom. The medical bay had become Kai's temporary office while his wounds healed, and despite official protocol, Thessa found herself visiting far more often than duty required. She told herself it was to monitor his recovery, to ensure the negotiations could continue smoothly, but the lie grew more transparent with each passing day. You're supposed to be resting, she said, finding him reviewing treaty documents despite the pain medication that should have left him unconscious. Resting is overrated. Kai looked up from his data pad, and that smile, the one that made her chest tighten in ways she couldn't classify, spread across his face. Besides, someone has to keep track of House Velenor's latest demands for trade. Concessions. House Velenor can wait. The words escaped before she could stop them, too gentle, too concerned. She stiffened, attempting to recover her professional demeanor. Your recovery serves the greater good of these negotiations. Is that the only reason you keep visiting me, Thessa? The question hit her like a physical blow. She turned away, pretending to examine his medical charts while her mind raced. For weeks now she'd been experiencing sensations she had no framework to understand. An acceleration of her heartbeat when he smiled, a hollow ache when he was in pain, a desperate need to be near him that defied all logical explanation. I don't understand the question, she said finally. I think you do. That evening, against every regulation she'd ever sworn to uphold, Thessa found herself guiding Kai through the station's restricted areas to her private sanctuary, a small garden, dome that housed plants from her ancestral homeworld. Bioluminescent flowers cast soft purple light over crystalline trees, and the air hummed with the gentle sound of artificial wind. It's beautiful, Kai breathed, reaching out to touch a flower that pulsed with inner light. I come here when the meditation chambers become insufficient. She moved deeper into the garden, her steps uncertain. My caste mother gave me these seeds before she ascended to the High Council. She said they would remind me of what we were before we became what we are. And what were you before? Passionate, chaotic, weak. The words tasted bitter. We evolved, beyond such primitive impulses millennia ago. Or maybe you just forgot how to feel. Thessa whirled to face him, silver eyes blazing. Feeling leads to suffering. I've watched worlds burn because beings couldn't control their emotions, couldn't set aside personal desires for the greater good. And I've watched worlds come alive because beings dared to love something more than their own safety. Kai stepped closer, his voice gentle despite her anger. What are you so afraid of, Thessa? I'm afraid of you, she whispered, the admission torn from somewhere deep inside her. I'm afraid of what you make me feel, what you make me want. I'm afraid that everything I've been taught, everything I am, is wrong. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft chiming of the garden's crystal wind chimes. Then Kai reached out, his fingers barely grazing hers. Maybe it's not wrong. Maybe it's just incomplete. The touch sent electricity racing up her arm, and Thessa gasped at the intensity of the sensation. She should pull away, should retreat to the safety of protocol and duty, but her hand turned palm up, fingers intertwining with his. Tell me about Earth, she said suddenly. Tell me about love as your people understand it. So he did. As they sat beneath the bioluminescent canopy, Kai spoke of families who fought and forgave, of lovers who chose each other across impossible odds, of strangers who became friends and friends who became something deeper. He told her about pain and loss, about how love made beings vulnerable but also made them stronger than they'd ever imagined possible. On Earth, we have a saying, he said, as the artificial night cycle dimmed the garden's lights. It's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Your people choose pain. We choose the possibility of something beautiful, even knowing it might hurt. Thessa stared at their joined hands, watching the play of light across their different skin tones. The council would call this contamination, emotional pollution. What do you call it? Before she could answer, emergency alarms began wailing throughout the station. They sprang apart as blast doors slammed shut, trapping them in the garden dome as red warning lights bathed everything in crimson urgency. Security breach in the diplomatic sector, the automated voice announced. All personnel remain insecure, locations until further notice. They were alone, truly alone, for the first time since Kai's arrival. The awareness hung between them like a live wire, dangerous and electric. Thessa's breathing quickened as she found herself studying the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the warmth in his brown eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed defenses. Thessa, he said softly, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. She moved toward him, as if in a dream, her hand rising to touch his face. His skin was warm, so much warmer than her own, and when he leaned into her touch, something inside her chest cracked open like ice in spring sunlight. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Neither do I. Not with you. Not like this. Their faces were inches apart now, and Thessa could feel his breath against her lips. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, to preserve the careful balance she'd maintained her entire life. But a stronger instinct, one that felt older and truer than all her training, urged her forward. I think, she breathed, I'm beginning to understand what your people mean by choice. And then she kissed him. It was clumsy at first. Her people didn't express affection this way. But Kai's gentle guidance taught her the rhythm, the give and take, the sweet vulnerability of opening oneself to another. When they finally broke, apart, both were breathing hard and Thessa's composure was in complete ruins. What have you done to me? She gasped. The same thing you've done to me, Kai replied, pulling her close. You've made me feel alive. Outside the garden dome, the security alert continued, but neither of them cared. In each other's arms, they had found something worth risking everything, for even if neither fully understood what that meant yet. The morning after their first kiss brought harsh reality crashing back into Thessa's carefully ordered world. High Counselor Xerion stood in Thessa's quarters, her ancient features carved from disapproval, silver eyes cold as stellar void. Your emotional degradation has been noted, the counselor said without preamble. The monitoring systems detected elevated stress hormones, irregular neural patterns. You are compromised. Thessa kept her expression neutral despite the terror, clawing at her chest. I have fulfilled all my duties to the negotiations, counselor. Your duties extend beyond mere protocol, child. You were chosen for this assignment because of your exemplary emotional discipline. That discipline is now questionable. The human ambassador requires cultural guidance the human ambassador requires nothing but adherence to established treaty frameworks. Xerion's voice cut like a blade. You will conclude these negotiations within the week and request immediate reassignment. The contamination must be contained. After the counselor left, Thessa sat alone in her quarters, staring at her reflection in the polished metal walls. The face looking back seemed alien, features softened by something she couldn't name, silver eyes holding depths that hadn't existed a month ago. She was changing, becoming something her people would never accept. But when she closed her eyes, she could still feel Kai's lips against hers, still hear his voice saying her name like it was something precious. For the first time in her life, she understood why beings might choose exile over emptiness. The public ceremony that evening was meant to demonstrate unity between their species, a cultural exchange where humans and Xerions would share art, music, and philosophy. Kai had insisted on it as part of the peace process, arguing that understanding came through experience, not just contracts. Thessa watched from the diplomatic platform as he addressed the mixed crowd, his words weaving together hope and possibility. He spoke of two species learning from each other, of strength found in diversity rather than uniformity. The crowd, both human and Xerion, listened with rapt attention. "We are different," Kai said, his eyes finding hers across the gathering. "Our hearts beat at different rhythms, our minds process emotion in different ways. But perhaps that's exactly why we need each other. Perhaps our differences aren't obstacles to overcome, but gifts to be shared." The applause was thunderous, and Thessa felt her chest swell with pride that she quickly suppressed. But she noticed she wasn't the only council member watching Kai with newly interested eyes. In the VIP section, she spotted Tormek Valshin, a hardliner who had opposed the peace talks from the beginning. Her blood chilled as she recognized the neural disruptor concealed in his ceremonial robes. Time seemed to slow as Tormek raised his weapon, the energy cell already charging with a whine that cut through the applause. Thessa calculated trajectories, angles, the precise moment when death would claim the man she. The thought stopped her cold. The man she what? But her body was already moving, muscle memory from combat training overriding conscious thought. She vaulted over the platform railing, hitting the ground running as Kai continued his speech, oblivious to the danger. "Kai!" she screamed. He turned at the sound of her voice, confusion flickering across his features just as Tormek's weapon discharged. The plasma bolt seared through the air where Kai's head had been. But he was already moving, his diplomat's reflexes finally catching up to the threat. The second bolt caught him in the chest as he threw himself toward Thessa, his body shielding hers from the follow-up shots that shattered the platform behind them. They hit the ground hard, Kai's weight pressing her into the crystalline floor as chaos erupted around them. "Stay down," he gasped, blood already staining his formal tunic. But Thessa was beyond hearing, beyond rational thought. Something primal and fierce had awakened in her. Not the cold calculation her people prized, but raw, desperate love that would tear the galaxy apart to protect what mattered most. She rolled out from under him, her ceremonial blade appearing in her hand as if by magic. Tormek was reloading, his weapon cycling through power phases, and in that moment of vulnerability, she struck. The blade found the gap between his armor plates, sliding between ribs with surgical precision. Tormek looked down at her in shock, silver blood spreading across his robes. "For the greater good," she whispered, the traditional Xerion phrase twisted into something entirely new. Security forces swarmed the area, but Thessa was already back, at Kai's side, her hands pressing against the plasma wound that was rapidly spreading across his chest. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow, and fear unlike anything she'd ever experienced crashed over her in waves. "Don't you dare," she whispered fiercely. "Don't you dare leave me now that I finally understand." "Understand? What?" he managed. "What love means. What you've been trying to teach me." Tears she'd never allowed herself to shed streamed down her face. "I love you, Kai Brennan. I love you more than duty, more than honor, more than the careful life I built before you showed me how to truly live." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining with desperate strength. "Thessa, I choose you," she said, her voice carrying across the chaos, audible to every Xerion in the crowd. "I choose love over logic, feeling over emptiness. I choose you." The medical teams arrived then, pulling them apart as they worked to stabilize Kai's injuries. But even as they loaded him onto the transport, Thessa could see the shock and horror on her people's faces. She had committed the ultimate heresy, choosing personal attachment over the greater good. High Counselor Zixara approached through the crowd, her expression unreadable. "You have revealed your true nature, Thessa Veltar," she said quietly. "The contamination is complete." "Yes," Thessa replied, watching the transport disappear into the medical complex. "It is." For the first time since childhood, she didn't care what the consequences might be. She had found something worth fighting for, worth sacrificing everything for. She had found love, and no force in the galaxy could make her give it up now. The trial had been swift and merciless. As Kai recovered from his injuries in the medical complex, Thessa faced the full weight of Xerion justice in the High Council chambers. The charges were severe: emotional contamination, breach of diplomatic protocol, and the murder of a council member, even if that member had been attempting assassination. "Thessa Veltar," High Counselor Xixara intoned, her voice echoing through the crystalline chamber. "You have brought chaos where there should be order, passion where there should be discipline. You have proven yourself unfit for civilized society." Thessa stood straight-backed before the 7-member tribunal, her ceremonial robes replaced by simple gray fabric that marked her as outcast. But her silver eyes held no regret, only fierce determination. "I have proven myself capable of growth, Counselor, of becoming more than the sum of my programming." "Growth?" Counselor Murthak leaned forward, his ancient face twisted with disgust. "You call this degradation growth? You have become as chaotic and unreliable as the humans themselves." "Perhaps that's exactly what we need to become." The gasps that rippled through the chamber were audible even through the sound dampeners. No one spoke to the council this way, challenged their fundamental beliefs so directly. But Thessa was past caring about protocol. "The human ambassador lies dying because he chose to protect me," she continued, her voice steady despite the pain in her chest. "He risked everything for someone from another species, someone he'd known for mere weeks. How is that weakness? How is that chaos? It's the strongest, most purposeful thing I've ever witnessed." "It is madness," Xixara replied coldly. "And you have been infected by it. Then I choose madness over emptiness." The sentence was exile, complete banishment from Xerion space, her name stricken from all records, her family connections dissolved. She would become nothing, no one, a ghost drifting between stars. Thessa accepted it without flinching. 2 days later, she sat beside Kai's bed in the medical complex, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. The plasma wound had been severe, requiring multiple surgeries and artificial tissue regeneration, but he would live. The doctor said he was lucky. A few centimeters higher, and the bolt would have pierced his heart. "Lucky," she murmured, thinking of the impossible chain of events that had brought them together. "Perhaps." His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her face with effort. "Thessa, what? The trial is over." She took his hand, marveling again at its warmth. "I've been exiled. Officially, I no longer exist." Horror flickered across his features. "No, I won't let them." "Kai," her fingers pressed gently against his lips. "It's done, and I chose it freely. But your life, your people, everything you've built, was built on a foundation of fear." She shifted closer, her free hand stroking through his dark hair. "I spent decades believing that feeling nothing was better than risking pain. You showed me how wrong I was." He struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his healing tissue. "Come back to Earth with me. The negotiations are finished. Both sides got what they needed from the peace treaty. We can build a new life together. A human and an exiled Xerion. Your people might not be ready for that. Then we'll help them get ready. Together." The word hung between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Together. Not as diplomat and liaison, not as representatives of their species, but as themselves. As two beings who had found something worth fighting for in each other. She leaned down, kissing him with all the passion she'd spent years suppressing. He tasted like hope and healing, like the future they were going to build despite the odds stacked against them. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too. More than protocols, more than duty, more than the safe life I had before I met you. Even though I'm no longer who I was when we met, especially because of that." His smile was radiant despite his weakness. "You're becoming who you were always meant to be." 6 months later, Earth's media outlets were buzzing with the story of Ambassador Kai Brennan and his Xerion partner, the couple whose love story had helped forge peace between two species. The xenobiologists were fascinated by their relationship. The philosophers debated its implications, and the romantics simply celebrated the proof that love could bridge any gap. But in their quiet apartment overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Kai and Thessa paid little attention to the outside world. They were too busy discovering each other, learning the rhythms of a life built on choice rather than obligation. "Do you ever regret it?" Kai asked one evening as they sat on their balcony, watching Earth's single moon rise over the water. Thessa considered the question seriously, as she considered everything these days. Her exile had cost her everything she'd once thought important: status, purpose, identity within her species. But it had given her something infinitely more valuable. "I regret that it took me so long to understand," she said finally. "I regret the years I spent believing that emptiness was strength. But you choosing love, never." She turned to find him watching her with that expression she'd come to treasure, wonder mixed with devotion, as if he still couldn't quite believe she was real. "We don't love like they do," she said, echoing her words from that first day. "We love better. Better? Completely. Without reservation, without fear of what it might cost us." She took his hand, intertwining their fingers in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "We love like it's the most important thing in the universe." "Maybe it is," Kai said, pulling her close. As Earth's moon climbed higher, casting silver light across the waves, two beings from different worlds held each other and planned their future. They would face challenges: prejudice from both species, the difficulty of bridging biological and cultural differences, the simple complexity of building a life together. But they would face them together, armed with the most powerful force in the galaxy: love freely chosen, freely given, and strong enough to reshape the very fabric of space between stars. In the end, Thessa reflected as she drifted off to sleep in Kai's arms, the Xerion Council had been right about one thing. She had been contaminated, infected by something that changed her fundamental nature. She had been infected by hope, and she wouldn't trade that infection for all the cold perfection in the galaxy.